Amina's story began not in the grand halls of the palace but in the small, dusty village that lay beneath the wide sky, where the earth was cracked from the sun and the winds carried whispers of old tales. She was born into a family of modest means. Her parents were farmers who worked tirelessly to coax life from the stubborn soil. From a young age, Amina showed a gentle spirit, a kindness that radiated even in the harshest moments, and a quiet strength that would carry her far beyond the fields where she grew up. Her eyes, dark and thoughtful, held a depth that seemed to reach beyond the world she knew. She dreamed not of riches or power, but of a life where her voice could be heard and her heart understood. When the chance came for Amina to serve in the palace, it was both a blessing and a challenge. The palace was a world apart from her village, a place of marble floors that gleamed like stars and walls adorned with tapestries that told stories of kings and queens long gone. Yet beneath the grandeur lay a strict hierarchy, a web of politics and rivalries that Amina had to navigate with care. As a lowly servant, her place was near the margins, where the light of privilege barely touched. She carried out her duties with humility and diligence, tending to the queen's chambers, sweeping the courtyards and running errands with a quiet grace that went largely unnoticed. But in a place so filled with ambition and jealousy, kindness could be mistaken for weakness, and humility for submission. Among the palace servants, there were those who saw Amina's gentle nature not as a strength but as an opportunity. Whispered conversations followed her footsteps, eyes narrowed with suspicion when she passed by. Rival servants, jealous of her quiet dignity and the small kindnesses she showed others, began to weave stories to tarnish her name. They said she was too bold, that she carried secrets she should not, and that her presence disturbed the delicate balance of the palace. This jealousy grew into a cold shadow that darkened Amina's days. The gossipers persuaded the palace guards and overseers to punish her, not with words but with isolation. It was decided that she should be made to sleep beside the latrine, a place no one dared to linger, a corner of the palace steeped in filth and neglect. This punishment was meant to humiliate her, to break her spirit and remind everyone of her lowly place. The night Amina was sent there, she felt the weight of the punishment not only on her body but on her soul. The latrine's foul smell filled the cramped space where she was forced to lay her head on the cold, hard ground. The coldness seeped into her bones, and the darkness wrapped around her like a shroud. Yet even in that desolation, Amina's spirit did not falter. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, finding within herself a quiet refuge where the cruelty of the world could not reach. Her days beside the latrine were marked by hardship. The sounds of laughter and chatter from the palace seemed distant and mocking. The other servants passed by without a glance, their faces twisted with disdain or indifference. The cold stone beneath her offered no comfort, and the biting winds that swept through the palace corridors carried the echoes of scorn. Yet Amina carried on, her heart beating steadily, her thoughts anchored in hope. In the palace hierarchy, she was near the bottom, a mere shadow in a world ruled by those born into privilege or favor. The noble ladies and guards lived in chambers filled with light and warmth, their voices carrying weight and command. Servants like Amina moved silently, their lives shaped by the orders of others and the harsh judgments passed without mercy. To be sent to sleep beside the latrine was to be cast into the depths of this hierarchy, a punishment that signaled not just low status but a warning to others who might dare to stand out. Yet Amina's story was not only one of suffering but of quiet resilience. She was beloved by some in secret, a few servants who saw beyond her forced exile and recognized the kindness that remained unbroken. To them, she was a symbol of endurance, a reminder that even in the darkest corners, a light could burn steady. In stolen moments, she tended to small acts of care, helping a child with a scraped knee, sharing a morsel of food with a hungry elder, or simply offering a smile that spoke of hope. The palace, grand and imposing, was a place of contradictions. It held beauty and cruelty, power and vulnerability, silence and secrets. In this world, Amina's presence was both fragile and fierce, a soft light flickering stubbornly against the shadows. Her journey had only just begun, but already it was clear that her laughter, her spirit, and her dreams would challenge the very foundations of the palace and the lives of those within it. Each day, as the sun rose and cast its golden light over the palace walls, Amina rose with it, unbroken, unbowed, and quietly determined to find her place not just beside the latrine but in the hearts of those who had forgotten how to hope. The days that followed were filled with a heavy silence broken only by the harsh sounds of the palace, footsteps echoing on stone floors, whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when Amina came near, and the distant laughter of those who had forgotten her name. Forced to sleep beside the latrine, she was cast into a world of filth and neglect, a place no one wished to speak of and fewer still dared to enter. The very air she breathed was thick with the stench of waste, a constant reminder of her punishment and the cruelty that had sought to erase her presence. Each morning, before the first light broke over the horizon, Amina would rise from the cold, damp ground where she had spent the night. The rough stones beneath her offered little comfort, and the chill of the palace walls seeped into her bones. The latrine, with its foul odor and unspeakable grime, was a place meant to break her spirit, to remind her and all who heard the story that she was beneath notice, beneath dignity. Isolation wrapped around her like a heavy cloak. The other servants kept their distance, their eyes averted or filled with thinly veiled contempt. They whispered behind closed doors, their voices sharp with cruelty and suspicion. Some sneered openly, mocking the girl who had dared to show kindness and courage. "She belongs here," they would say bitterly, "beside the filth where she cannot harm us with her foolish dreams." Yet Amina did not respond with anger or despair. Inside her, a quiet fire burned, a resilience forged not in defiance but in deep, unyielding hope. She held fast to the belief that her worth was not measured by where she slept or how others saw her, but by the kindness she carried within. In moments stolen from the watchful eyes of the palace, she would close her eyes and breathe deeply, recalling the fields of her childhood where the wind had whispered promises of better days. The harshness of her surroundings tested her daily. Flies buzzed relentlessly, drawn to the latrine's decay, settling on her skin and clothes despite her efforts to brush them away. The dampness clung to her like a second skin, and the cold nights gnawed at her with relentless bite. But she endured, her body growing stronger even as her spirit remained gentle and unbroken. Food was scarce and often given grudgingly. Where others dined on rich stews and freshly baked bread, Amina's meals were meager, bits of dry grain or stale bread left over from the kitchens. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she shared what little she had with the stray animals that sometimes approached, finding companionship in their silent presence. Her only solace came from the small acts of kindness that filtered through the walls of her isolation. A young servant girl, brave and curious, would sometimes slip scraps of food to her when the overseers' backs were turned. An old healer, who worked in the palace gardens, spoke softly to her on rare occasions, offering words of comfort and advice. These fleeting connections reminded Amina that even in the darkest places humanity could be found. The palace's daily rhythms went on without her. As dawn broke, the courtiers and nobles began their rituals of adornment and ceremony, their voices ringing with authority and command. The queen's chambers buzzed with attendants preparing her for the day, unaware or unwilling to remember the girl cast aside. Yet in the quiet corners where Amina dwelled, the weight of invisibility pressed down, a silent testament to the cruelty born of jealousy and fear. Despite the constant mockery and neglect, Amina's determination never wavered. She found strength in small routines, washing her face with water drawn from the palace well, smoothing the dirt from her clothes as best she could, and whispering prayers to the ancestors for guidance and protection. Each act was a rebellion against the darkness, a refusal to let the harshness of her punishment define her. At night, when the palace fell silent and the stars emerged in the velvet sky, Amina allowed herself moments of quiet reflection. She would listen to the distant songs carried on the wind and imagine herself far from the latrine, walking through fields of wildflowers, her laughter mingling with the birdsong. These dreams became her refuge, a place where the bitterness of her reality softened and hope took root. Her resilience was not born from denial of pain but from an acceptance of it, a deep understanding that suffering was part of the journey but did not have to be its end. In the face of humiliation, she cultivated grace. In isolation, she nurtured connection with the unseen world, sensing that her story was not finished, that her laughter and dreams held a power yet to be revealed. The palace walls, grand and imposing, might have tried to silence her, but Amina's spirit was a quiet storm, gathering strength beneath the surface. She knew that survival was not just about enduring the present but preparing for a future where she could reclaim her place, where the truth of her visions could no longer be ignored. Each day she awoke beside the latrine was a testament to her courage, a refusal to be broken by cruelty, a promise that no matter how deep the darkness, the light within her would not be extinguished. In the harshest of places, Amina's heart remained unbowed, quietly waiting for the moment when her dreams would speak loud enough for the whole palace to hear. In the quiet moments between the harshness of the day and the deep silence of the night, Amina found herself caught in a world few could see, a world woven with whispers and shadows, where the veil between the living and the spirit realm grew thin. This world was not one she had chosen nor fully understood, but it had claimed her from a young age, marking her as different in ways that set her apart from everyone else in the palace. From childhood, Amina had experienced strange sensations, visions that flickered like candlelight in her mind, dreams that carried messages too vivid and urgent to dismiss as mere fantasy. These were not the playful dreams of youth but powerful glimpses into a realm beyond the everyday. At times, the spirits of her ancestors seemed to reach out through the darkness, their voices soft and steady, guiding and warning, their presence both comforting and unsettling. When Amina first recognized this gift, she felt a mixture of awe and fear. The visions came unexpectedly, often in moments of stillness or during the deep sleep that followed her restless nights beside the latrine. Faces from long ago would appear, ancient figures draped in ceremonial robes, eyes filled with wisdom and sorrow. They showed her scenes of the past and warnings of what might come. She saw rivers running red, the palace shrouded in shadow, and a queen lying silent beneath a heavy sky. These dreams were both a blessing and a burden. On one hand, they offered Amina a sense of connection to something greater, a lineage of strength and purpose that reached back through generations. On the other, they isolated her further. How could she explain these visions to others who dismissed her existence? How could she share a truth that was wrapped in mystery and fear without inviting ridicule or worse? The palace, with all its grandeur and power, was a place of rigid order and skepticism. Superstition lurked in its corridors, but genuine belief in the unseen was scarce, especially for someone of Amina's low status. The other servants whispered that she was strange, touched by something dark or dangerous. The jealous rivals who had cast her out used her gift as a weapon against her, spinning tales of witchcraft and curses. This only deepened her isolation, turning her spiritual connection into a secret she guarded fiercely. Amina spent hours alone, wrestling with the weight of her visions. She sought understanding through quiet meditation and whispered prayers to the ancestors who had come to her in dreams. She learned to listen closely to the signs in nature, the rustling leaves, the flight of birds, the shifting winds, hoping they would reveal the meaning behind the images that haunted her sleep. Sometimes she would trace patterns in the dirt with trembling fingers, trying to capture the symbols she glimpsed in her mind. Despite her efforts, clarity was elusive. The messages were often cryptic, layered in symbolism and metaphor. She saw a dark river flowing beneath the palace walls, but what did it mean? Was it a warning of danger or a path to salvation? She saw the queen's face, pale and still, but could she prevent the tragedy that awaited? These questions swirled in her thoughts, a storm she could neither calm nor escape. The duality of her gift weighed heavily. It gave her purpose, a reason to endure the cruel punishment and neglect. It told her that her suffering was not in vain, that her voice mattered even if it was silenced by others. Yet it also marked her as different, making her a target for suspicion and fear. She felt the sharp sting of loneliness, knowing that few could understand the burden she carried. At times, the spirit's presence was overwhelming. She would awaken suddenly, heart pounding, hearing distant voices or seeing flickers of light that no one else could perceive. The boundary between the spirit world and reality blurred, leaving her disoriented and vulnerable. But with each encounter she grew stronger, learning to trust the guidance she received and to use it to navigate the treacherous life within the palace walls. Amina's connection to the spirit world also gave her moments of profound insight and clarity. She learned to read the subtle shifts in the palace's atmosphere, the tension in a whispered conversation, the unease behind a noble's smile. These insights allowed her to anticipate danger and understand the hidden motives that surrounded her. Though powerless in the eyes of many, she possessed a quiet wisdom that made her presence felt even when ignored. Yet this wisdom was a lonely road. She longed for someone to share her burden, to understand the visions and dreams that shaped her existence. Her few moments of solace came from secret prayers and silent communion with the ancestors who visited her in the stillness. They were her teachers, her protectors, and sometimes her only companions. In these sacred moments, Amina found strength. She resolved that her gift, however heavy, was meant to serve a greater purpose. If she could decipher the dreams that troubled her, perhaps she could use them to protect the queen, the palace, and the people she had come to care for despite the cruelty she had endured. This resolve became the anchor that held her steady amid the storms of suspicion and scorn. Her gift was a silent rebellion, a light that refused to be extinguished in the face of darkness. Though she was cast aside and forced to sleep beside the latrine, her spirit remained connected to the ancient wisdom of her ancestors. The dreams that visited her were not curses but calls to action, urging her to speak the truth and to prepare for the trials that lay ahead. Amina understood that the path before her would be difficult. The palace was a place of secrets and shadows, where power was wielded with ruthless precision. To reveal her visions was to risk everything, her safety, her dignity, perhaps even her life. But she also knew that silence was no longer an option. The spirits had spoken and she was their messenger. In the depth of her heart, Amina carried the hope that one day her gift would be recognized not as a curse but as a blessing. That her visions would save lives and bring justice to a place where cruelty had long reigned. Until that day she would endure, drawing strength from the unseen world that whispered its truths into her soul, guiding her through the darkest nights beside the latrine and into the uncertain dawn of a new beginning. That night, as the palace settled into its usual stillness and the last flickers of candlelight died away, Amina lay beside the latrine on the cold, unforgiving stone. The chill in the air pressed heavily against her skin, but it was nothing compared to the weight that had settled on her heart. Sleep did not come easily. Her mind was restless, caught between the harsh reality of her surroundings and the mysterious pull of the spirit world that had begun to claim her in ways she could neither fully understand nor resist. When sleep finally embraced her, it was not a gentle descent into dreams but a sudden plunge into a vision so vivid and haunting that it felt more like a waking nightmare. She found herself standing at the edge of a vast darkness, a shadowed expanse that stretched beyond sight. The air was thick and heavy, filled with a silence that pressed down like a suffocating veil. Above her, the sky was a swirling canvas of storm clouds, black and roiling, illuminated by flashes of pale, unnatural light. In the distance, a great river churned, its waters swollen and red as if stained with blood. The river's roar was a terrible sound, a warning carried on the wind that rustled through the twisted branches of ancient trees lining its banks. The trees themselves seemed alive, their gnarled limbs reaching out like hands grasping for something lost. Then she saw the palace. It stood proud but fragile, bathed in an eerie glow that seemed to flicker like a dying flame. The once majestic walls were cracked and crumbling, shadows creeping along their surfaces as if the very stones mourned a fate yet to come. Within those walls she glimpsed a figure, regal and still, lying motionless upon a bed draped in crimson cloth. The queen. Amina felt a coldness seep into her bones, a chill that spoke of finality and loss. Around the queen, dark shapes moved, silent specters that whispered secrets too terrible to hear. They wove through the chambers like threads of night, their presence a sinister echo of the dream's message. Symbols flashed before her eyes, an owl with eyes like burning coals, a broken crown scattered across a blood-stained floor, a black rose wilting in a pool of tears. Each image burned itself into her mind, a puzzle she struggled to piece together even as the dream carried her deeper into its shadowed depths. Her heart pounded with urgency as she sensed a presence drawing near, a voice, distant but unmistakable, calling her name in a whisper carried by the wind. It was the voice of an ancestor, or perhaps a spirit guardian, warning her that the vision was not merely a dream but a prophecy. The queen's death was coming, swift and certain, and only those who heeded the warning could hope to prevent the worst. Amina awoke suddenly, gasping for breath, her body drenched in cold sweat. The dawn's first light had not yet touched the palace, and the world outside remained cloaked in darkness. Yet within her, a fire had been ignited, a fierce determination to act, to break the silence that threatened to drown the truth. She sat up, her mind racing with the images and emotions the dream had left behind. The weight of the vision pressed down on her chest, a heavy reminder of the responsibility now resting on her shoulders. She knew that the palace would not easily accept her warnings, given her lowly status and the scorn she had already endured. But silence was no longer an option. With trembling hands, Amina rose from her cold bed and wrapped herself in the thin cloak she had been given. She moved carefully through the shadowed corridors, her footsteps muffled by the thick stone floors. Every echo seemed loud in the stillness, a reminder of how alone she was in this vast place. She sought out the palace guards first, those who patrolled the halls with stern faces and sharp eyes. Her voice was steady but urgent as she recounted the dream, describing the ominous river, the crumbling walls, and the queen lying still beneath the crimson cloth. She spoke of the dark shapes and the warnings whispered by the spirits, pleading for them to take heed. But the guards looked at her with skepticism, their expressions cold and dismissive. "You're dreaming shadows, girl," one sneered. "Go back to your place." Another shook his head, muttering that she had been drinking too much water from the well or imagining things born of loneliness and fear. Undeterred, Amina sought the queen's attendants, those who moved closest to the throne. She found them busy with their duties, faces pale but busy with routine, and tried to explain her vision. Some listened with polite doubt, others with outright disbelief. One whispered that she was cursed, another that she sought attention through lies. The rejection stung, but Amina's resolve only grew stronger. She knew that the dream was real, that the queen's fate was sealed unless someone listened and acted. She turned away from the cold faces, her heart heavy but her spirit unbroken. That day the palace carried on as usual. The courtiers went about their business, the queen held court with regal grace, and the servants whispered behind closed doors. Yet beneath the surface, an undercurrent of unease began to stir, though no one could yet name it. Amina's dream hung in the air like a shadow waiting to fall. As night approached once more, Amina found herself haunted by the images and sounds of the vision. The river's roar echoed in her ears, the owl's burning eyes watched from the darkness, and the broken crown weighed heavily on her mind. She prayed to the ancestors for strength and guidance, begging them to help her find a way to protect the queen and the palace from the fate she had seen. In that long night, alone beside the latrine once again, Amina understood the enormity of her gift and the burden it carried. Her dream was not just a warning, it was a call to action, a plea from the spirits to stand against the coming darkness. She knew that the days ahead would be filled with struggle, that her voice might be silenced or her spirit crushed. But deep within a new fire burned, a determination to fight for truth, for justice, and for the life that still flickered within the queen's chambers. The night of the first prophetic dream marked a turning point, not just for Amina but for the entire palace. It was the moment when the fragile threads of fate began to unravel, setting in motion a story of courage, resilience, and the power of a single voice to change the course of destiny. Amina's heart was heavy but resolute as she set out to share the vision that had haunted her through the long, restless night. The images, the swollen river, the crumbling palace walls, the queen draped in crimson cloth, burned vividly in her mind, compelling her to warn those who could act. Though her body was weary from the cold stone beside the latrine and the meager food she survived on, her spirit was aflame with urgency. If she could save even one life, even one moment, it would be worth every hardship she had endured. Her first steps led her toward the palace guards, men who held the power to influence the pulse of the court. They moved through the corridors with an air of authority, their weapons gleaming in the flickering torchlight. Amina approached cautiously, lowering her gaze out of habit but steeling herself to speak. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of her plea as she recounted the dream in detail, the ominous signs, the prophecy, the urgency that could not be ignored. The guards exchanged glances, their faces hardening into expressions of disbelief and disdain. One stepped forward, his tone mocking and sharp. "Dreams are for children and fools, girl. We deal in reality, not shadows and whispers." Another snorted, shaking his head. "You should worry about where you'll sleep tonight, not fantasies that will bring you nothing but trouble." Despite her desperation, Amina found no sympathy in their eyes, only impatience and contempt. She pleaded again, urging them to listen, to watch for signs, to protect the queen. But their dismissive laughter echoed through the halls, a cruel reminder of her lowly place. "Go back to your latrine," one sneered, "before you get yourself into real trouble." Her attempts to warn the guards ended in cold dismissal, but Amina's determination only deepened. If those who wielded power would not listen, she would seek those closest to the queen herself. She moved quietly to the inner chambers where the queen's attendants worked, women of grace and status who carried the queen's secrets and commanded respect in the palace. Approaching them was a delicate task. Their eyes flickered with suspicion the moment she entered their presence, as if sensing the low status she bore like a mark of shame. Amina swallowed her fear and told them the story of her dream with as much clarity and urgency as she could muster. She spoke of the dark river, the broken crown, and the shadows that haunted the queen's chambers. One attendant's lips curled in a faint smile, not of kindness but of scorn. "You speak as if your dreams are truth," she said coldly. "But dreams are the whispers of the weak and the desperate." Another muttered that Amina was mad or trying to stir trouble, warning her to stay silent lest she invite punishment. The attendant's disbelief was a bitter pill. Amina realized that her words, no matter how earnest, were met with walls built from prejudice and fear. To them, she was nothing more than a servant, a girl beneath notice, and her visions were dismissed as delusions born of loneliness and hardship. Some whispered behind closed doors that she was a liar, a witch even who sought to undermine the queen's reign. Despite the scorn, Amina's resolve remained unbroken. She understood that her status in the palace rendered her powerless in the eyes of many, that speaking truth to power was a perilous endeavor when your voice was easily silenced. But she refused to let fear chain her tongue. She sought other servants who might be sympathetic, those whose lives touched hers in quiet ways. Some listened with wary eyes but quickly distanced themselves, unwilling to risk the wrath of the palace's inner circle. Others advised silence, warning that speaking too loudly would only bring more suffering. Yet a few offered small tokens of encouragement, a nod, a whispered word of faith, that buoyed her spirit amid the rejection. In the days that followed, Amina moved through the palace like a shadow, carrying the weight of her secret alone. Her warnings remained unheard, her dreams a silent scream against the walls of power and indifference. Yet in her heart, the urgency of the prophecy never waned. She watched as the queen's health seemed untouched by concern, as the court celebrated and feasted, blind to the storm gathering just beyond their sight. The loneliness of her position pressed down, but it also steeled her courage. She knew that her visions were true, that the spirits had spoken through her, and that the fate she had seen was not set in stone but could be changed if only she could break through the walls of disbelief. One evening, as she sat alone beside the latrine, Amina allowed herself a moment of quiet despair. The rejection, the mockery, the isolation, they weighed heavily on her soul. But beneath the sorrow, a spark of defiance glowed. She would not be silenced. Her dream was a message from the ancestors, a call to protect the queen and the palace. And she would find a way to make them listen no matter the cost. The palace, with all its grandeur and power, was a place of secrets and shadows. Yet within those shadows, a single light flickered, Amina's unwavering belief in the truth of her vision and her determination to stand against the tide of doubt. The struggle to be heard was just beginning, and the path ahead was fraught with peril. But Amina's spirit was unyielding, a beacon of hope in a world that sought to keep her silent. Her attempts to warn the palace were met with scorn and disbelief, but they were also the first steps in a journey that would change everything. The power of her dream could not be denied forever, and the echoes of her warning would soon ripple through the halls of the palace, shaking its very foundations. The queen, once a vibrant and commanding presence within the palace walls, began to show signs that something was amiss. At first, the changes were so subtle that many dismissed them as mere fatigue from the endless duties that came with ruling a kingdom. Her skin, once radiant and smooth, took on a pale hue, as if the very life was slowly draining from her veins. The sharp sparkle in her eyes dulled, replaced by a weariness that even the brightest jewels or finest silks could not conceal. Court attendants noticed that she no longer moved with the same grace and energy. The queen's steps became slower, her once confident voice softer and tinged with a fragility that unsettled those around her. During public audiences, she occasionally paused as if gathering strength, and there were moments when her hands trembled ever so slightly while resting upon the throne's armrests. These small signs did not escape the notice of the palace's keen observers, but their significance was minimized or ignored. Whispers began to circulate among the servants and nobles alike, rumors that the queen was unwell, that a shadow had fallen upon her health. Yet outwardly the palace maintained its usual grandeur and decorum. Courtiers dismissed the murmurs as mere gossip, attributing any signs of illness to the natural burdens of age or the strain of governance. The queen herself insisted on continuing her duties, refusing to acknowledge her faltering strength, determined to present an unshakable front. Among the palace's lower ranks, however, fear and superstition took root. Some whispered that the queen had been cursed, that dark forces had been unleashed against her. The very same spirits that Amina had glimpsed in her dreams seemed to manifest in hushed conversations, shadows lurking in the corners of the palace where light struggled to reach. Servants crossed themselves when passing the queen's chambers, and some avoided looking directly at her, fearing that to do so might invite misfortune. The queen's illness became a subject of speculation not just for its cause but for its ominous implications. Some believed it was a punishment for sins long buried, a consequence of decisions made in secret chambers far from the public eye. Others feared that the queen's decline signaled a greater threat to the kingdom itself, a harbinger of instability and unrest. Yet, for all the unease beneath the surface, no one dared to speak openly or challenge the royal facade. The royal physicians, summoned to tend to the queen, offered vague reassurances. They spoke of exhaustion, stress, and minor ailments that would pass with rest and care. Their treatments were discreet, conducted behind heavy curtains and whispered doors, leaving the court to wonder while maintaining the illusion of control. In truth, the queen's condition was more serious than anyone dared admit, but pride and politics kept the truth veiled. Amina observed these changes from her place in the shadows, her heart heavy with the knowledge that her dream was coming true. The subtle signs, once easily dismissed, now painted a clearer picture of impending tragedy. She felt the weight of urgency grow stronger, but the walls of disbelief around her seemed thicker than ever. The palace was caught between skepticism and fear, unable or unwilling to confront the reality that loomed just beyond their sight. As days passed, the atmosphere in the palace shifted. Courtiers grew quieter, their laughter less frequent. Meetings were held behind closed doors, and the queen's presence at public events became increasingly rare. The once vibrant halls echoed with a tense silence, a fragile calm before an unknown storm. Yet, to the outside world, the palace maintained its grandeur, a mask that concealed the slow unraveling within. Amidst this uncertainty, rumors took on a life of their own. Some spoke of shadowy figures seen near the queen's chambers at odd hours, others of strange noises and flickering lights that no one could explain. These tales spread like wildfire, fanning the flames of fear and suspicion. The palace, a place of power and tradition, now trembled under the weight of unseen threats and whispered warnings. In this growing tension, Amina's vision remained a beacon of truth, even as it was drowned out by doubt and denial. She watched, waited, and prepared for the moment when the palace could no longer ignore the signs, when the shadow that haunted the queen would step out of darkness and into the light of day. The palace, vast and intricate, was a place where power and influence shifted like the tides, and in its shadowed corridors, fear could breed plots as deadly as any sword. Among those who watched Amina with growing unease were the palace rivals, servants and courtiers alike, who saw in her not just a lowly outcast but a threat. Her visions, whispered warnings, and quiet resolve unsettled them. They feared the power she might gain if her dreams were believed, and the change she could inspire in the delicate balance of court politics. At first, their unease was subtle, a sideways glance here, a whispered caution there. But as Amina continued to speak of her prophetic dreams, the whispers turned into deliberate schemes aimed at silencing her before her voice could grow too loud. These rivals, some long entrenched in palace intrigues, understood well how dangerous a single truth could be when spoken by one who others ignored. They began by sowing seeds of doubt among the servants and guards, spreading rumors that Amina was mad or cursed. She walks too often in the shadows, one would say, and the spirits she speaks of are but demons in disguise. They painted her as a witch, someone whose presence invited misfortune and whose visions were the product of dark magic rather than divine insight. These tales spread quickly and fear took root, turning many who had once shown quiet sympathy into wary bystanders. To discredit her further, they orchestrated subtle acts designed to undermine her credibility. They tampered with her belongings, planting small items associated with forbidden rituals, herbs, bones, or trinkets, so that discovery would lead to accusations of sorcery. When she moved through the palace, they whispered behind her back, accusing her of consorting with spirits that sought to upend the natural order. Even the palace priests, swayed by these tales, began to view her with suspicion, their prayers tinged with warning. The rivals did not stop there. They sought to isolate her completely, ensuring that those few who dared to listen to Amina would be discouraged or punished. They whispered threats to her secret allies, a young guard who had shown kindness, a healer who believed in her visions, warning them that association with Amina could bring ruin. Slowly, the circle of support around her began to shrink, the palace walls closing in like a tightening noose. Amina felt the pressure mounting but refused to yield. Each new attempt to silence her became a test of her resilience. She learned to move carefully, to speak in hushed tones, and to watch for the shadows that followed her steps. Her visions, once a private burden, now felt heavier, weighed down by the knowledge that the palace's darkest forces were arrayed against her. One night, as she lay beside the latrine, she heard footsteps approaching, soft but deliberate. She tensed, heart pounding, as a figure emerged from the darkness, a rival servant known for cruelty and cunning. The servant's eyes gleamed with malice as he sneered, "You think your dreams make you powerful? They will be your undoing." With a shove, he forced her roughly, a warning meant to intimidate. But Amina met his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear. The tension in the palace grew palpable. Behind closed doors, plots were hatched not just to discredit but to remove her altogether. Some whispered of banishment, others of more sinister fates. The rivals knew that as long as Amina lived and spoke, the fragile peace of the court was threatened. Her visions challenged the carefully maintained illusions of control, and in the palace, control was everything. Despite the danger, Amina found strength in the very opposition she faced. Each threat and scheme only hardened her resolve to see the truth known. She reminded herself that the spirits had chosen her for a purpose, that the visions were not mere dreams but calls to protect and to warn. Her suffering was part of a greater story, one that demanded courage and faith. In secret, she sought out her few remaining allies, sharing what she could and drawing on their support to navigate the perilous waters of palace intrigue. Together, they whispered plans of protection and resilience, knowing that open confrontation would bring swift consequences. They became a quiet resistance, a fragile but determined force against the dark designs of their enemies. The palace rivals, confident in their schemes, underestimated Amina's inner strength. They believed that fear and isolation would break her, that the weight of suspicion would silence her voice forever. But what they failed to see was that every act of cruelty only fueled the fire within her, a fire that would not be extinguished by shadows or threats. As the danger escalated, Amina's story became one of survival and defiance, a testament to the power of truth in a world built on secrets and lies. The palace, with all its glitter and grandeur, was a stage for a silent war, one where the fate of the queen, the kingdom, and the very soul of justice hung in the balance. In the face of plotting enemies and growing peril, Amina stood firm, her visions lighting the path through the darkness. She was no longer just a girl cast beside the latrine. She was a beacon of hope, a voice of warning, and a spirit unyielding. The palace rivals might plot and scheme, but they could not silence the truth she carried, a truth that would soon shake the foundations of power itself. Among the cold stone walls of the palace, where shadows lengthened and suspicion thrived, Amina's world seemed bleak and unyielding. Yet even in the darkest corners, light can be found where hope takes root and unexpected allies emerge. These were the people who, despite the risk to themselves, chose to see beyond the whispers and rumors, who recognized the truth in Amina's visions and the courage in her heart. The first to step forward was Juma, a young guard whose gaze held a quiet kindness uncommon in the hardened faces around him. Unlike many of his comrades, Juma did not dismiss Amina's warnings as mere fantasy or madness. Instead, he had noticed the sincerity in her eyes, the strength beneath her gentle demeanor. His own experiences in the palace, watching the injustice and cruelty inflicted upon the powerless, had softened his heart and opened his mind to possibilities beyond what was spoken aloud. Juma's initial approach was cautious. He waited for moments when the overseers were distracted, slipping small tokens of reassurance to Amina, a piece of bread, a whispered word, a glance that said, "You are not alone." When Amina confided in him about her dreams and the growing danger to the queen, Juma listened without judgment. He promised to keep her secret and to watch over her when others sought to do her harm. Another who joined Amina's quiet circle was Malika, a healer whose knowledge of herbs and remedies was matched only by her compassion. Malika had long been skeptical of palace politics and the cruelties that often went unchecked. When she encountered Amina, sick and isolated beside the latrine, she saw not a castaway but a spirit fighting to survive. Intrigued by the visions Amina described, Malika sought to understand their meaning and the power behind them. Together, they spent stolen moments in the palace gardens, where Malika shared her wisdom about the unseen forces at work in the world. She taught Amina how to protect herself with simple rituals and herbs, how to cleanse the body and spirit against harm. More importantly, she offered friendship, a balm to the loneliness that had gnawed at Amina's soul. Malika's belief became a source of strength, a reminder that truth could find allies even in unlikely places. The third was Elder Bayo, a figure of quiet authority whose years in the palace had given him insight into its hidden currents. Though he held no official power, his counsel was sought by those who understood the value of wisdom born from experience. Bayo had witnessed many seasons of change and had learned to read the signs that others ignored. When Amina's story reached his ears, he did not dismiss it but sought her out to hear her truth firsthand. Elder Bayo's presence brought a new dimension of hope. He spoke with reverence of the ancestors and the spirit world, recognizing in Amina's visions the echoes of ancient wisdom. He advised caution but encouraged courage, reminding her that the path ahead would be fraught with peril but that the spirits chose their messengers carefully. With Bayo's guidance, Amina began to understand the deeper significance of her gift and the responsibility it carried. Together, this unlikely group formed a fragile network of support within the palace's oppressive walls. They met in secret, behind hidden doors, beneath the cover of night, or in the quiet corners of the gardens, sharing knowledge, planning, and hope. Their conversations were filled with hushed urgency, weaving strategies to protect Amina and to spread her warnings to those who might listen without fear. Juma used his position as a guard to subtly influence the palace's security. He kept a watchful eye on those who sought to harm Amina, diverting suspicion and intercepting threats. His presence was a shield, a quiet assurance that danger would not find her easily. When rumors swirled, Juma's steady gaze and calm words helped to temper fears and doubts among the lower ranks. Malika's healing skills became a lifeline for Amina. She tended to her wounds, both physical and spiritual, with gentle hands and a compassionate heart. Beyond medicine, Malika offered teachings that strengthened Amina's connection to the spirit world, helping her to interpret her visions with greater clarity and to guard against the dark forces that sought to silence her. Her friendship was a sanctuary amid the harshness of the palace. Elder Bao's wisdom lent credibility to Amina's message. When he spoke of the spirits and the meaning behind the visions, others listened with a respect born from years of experience. Bao's counsel helped to shift the court's attitude, planting seeds of belief and opening minds that had long been closed. Though cautious, his influence created cracks in the walls of skepticism that surrounded Amina. Together, they devised discreet ways to spread the warning of the queen's impending danger. Messages were passed through trusted servants, coded in songs and stories, whispered during moments when eyes were turned away. Their efforts were slow and careful, for open defiance was a risk none could afford. Yet with each small step, the message grew stronger, reaching ears that might act when the time came. Amina's confidence blossomed under the protection and guidance of her new allies. No longer alone in her struggle, she found the courage to face the palace's shadows with renewed determination. The fear that once threatened to consume her was tempered by the knowledge that others believed in her, in the truth of her visions and in the possibility of change. The bonds they forged were more than strategy, they were a testament to the power of trust and solidarity in a world designed to divide. In the quiet moments shared beneath the moonlit sky, away from the watchful eyes of the court, Amina felt a strength that transcended her hardships. It was a strength born of connection, of shared purpose, and of hope that even the darkest night could be pierced by the light of a single flame. As their circle grew, so too did the resolve to protect the queen and the palace from the fate foretold. The palace's grand walls might have been built to contain power and control, but within those walls a new force was rising, a force born from courage, wisdom, and the unyielding spirit of a girl who refused to be silenced. In the heart of the palace's shadows, Amina's story was no longer one of isolation and fear. It was a story of alliance and resilience, of the quiet strength that emerges when unlikely companions stand together against the tides of doubt and danger. The journey ahead remained uncertain and fraught with peril, but with allies at her side, Amina was ready to face whatever darkness awaited, guided by the light of her visions and the promise of hope. The palace, once vibrant with ceremony and life, was cloaked in a heavy silence that seemed to seep into every stone and shadow. The queen, who had long carried the weight of the kingdom on her frail shoulders, breathed her last amid the flickering glow of candlelight and whispered prayers. Her passing was both sudden and yet somehow inevitable, a dark fulfillment of the visions that had haunted Amina's restless nights. In the grand chamber where the queen had held court for years, courtiers and attendants gathered in stunned disbelief. Faces once painted with confidence and power now reflected a mixture of sorrow, fear, and a dawning realization. The news spread swiftly, a ripple that shook the very foundation of the palace. Whispers of the queen's failing health were no longer rumors, they were truth laid bare for all to see. Amina, once cast aside and scorned, stood quietly in a corner, her heart heavy with a complex blend of grief and vindication. The dream she had shared, dismissed and ridiculed, had come to pass. The symbols, the dark river, the broken crown, the blood-stained floor, were no longer cryptic images but grim realities etched into the palace's history. For a moment, the room seemed suspended in time, the air thick with the weight of loss and the tremors of change. Then, slowly, eyes began to turn toward Amina, their expressions shifting from doubt to awe. The girl who had been forced to sleep beside the latrine was now recognized as the bearer of a truth too powerful to ignore. Some courtiers approached her with cautious reverence, seeking to understand the visions she had described with such clarity. Questions flowed: how had she come to see these things? Was she truly connected to the spirits? Others remained skeptical, wary of the power her prophecy now wielded. Yet even the harshest critics could not deny the coincidence that the queen's death matched Amina's warning with unsettling precision. With the queen's passing, the palace became a stage for upheaval. Power vacuums opened, alliances shifted, and long-hidden ambitions surfaced. The courtiers who had once scorned Amina found themselves re-evaluating their stance, aware that her insight could no longer be dismissed as folly. Her name moved from whispered gossip to a voice that demanded attention. Amina's status within the palace began to change, though not without resistance. Some sought to claim her favor, while others plotted to control or silence her once more. But the quiet strength she had cultivated through years of hardship remained unshaken. Supported by her allies, the loyal guard Juma, the compassionate healer Malika, and the wise elder Bayo, she navigated the shifting tides with grace and determination. Her visions became a source of guidance for those who sought stability amid the uncertainty. The palace elders, once dismissive, now consulted her for insight into the future and advice on protecting the kingdom from further harm. Amina's connection to the spirit world was no longer a secret but a revered gift, a bridge between the seen and unseen realms. As the palace mourned, preparations began for the queen's funeral, a solemn ceremony that would mark the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter. The grand halls were draped in mourning cloth, and the air was thick with incense and sorrowful songs. Yet beneath the grief lay a current of hope, a belief that from loss could come renewal, that the prophecy carried not just warning but the promise of change. In the days that followed, the palace slowly embraced the truth that Amina had long known. Her prophecy, once a source of scorn, became a foundation for healing and transformation. The court recognized that in listening to her, they might prevent future tragedies and build a kingdom stronger than before. Amina's journey, from outcast to seer, from silence to voice, became a testament to the power of truth and resilience. Her story inspired those who had felt powerless, reminding them that even the most unlikely among them could change the course of history. The palace, forever altered by the queen's death and Amina's vision, began to heal, its walls echoing with the promise of a brighter future. In this new dawn, Amina stood not as a shadow beside the latrine but as a beacon of hope and wisdom, a living legacy born from dreams that had crossed the boundaries of worlds to shape destiny itself.